Memphis, and welcome. My name is Vicki Terry, the Executive Director of the NAACP Memphis branch, and I am the moderator for this live stream Q&A session with Chief Cerelyn C.J. Davis. Chief Davis is Mayor Jim Strickland's appointee to become our next Chief of Police and lead the Memphis Police Department, pending City Council approval. Chief Davis, welcome, and thank you for joining us from Durham, North Carolina.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you very much.
All right, Chief Davis, are you ready for this?
I think so, yes.
All right, then. Before diving into the Q&A, I want to give the folks watching a little background. This Q&A session was created in partnership between the Strickland administration and City Council to allow Memphians to submit their questions to Chief Davis. Using City Council guidelines for public comments during council meetings, residents submitted their name and address, typed out their questions ahead of time so that those questions could be asked today. To save time, we will only be sharing the name of the person who submitted the question and the zip code where they live. A total of 78 questions were submitted. Now, we're not going to give you all 78 of those questions, Chief Davis, so you can relax. These questions were submitted and they fell into 6 categories: community, policing and reform, best practices, gun violence and permitless carry laws, crime reduction, officer accountability and transparency, and personal history. I have selected 3 questions from each category that best represent what citizens wanted to know. Keep in mind, many of you submitted the same or similar questions. For example, several questions were asked about police response to mental health calls. If you don't hear your name called, your question may have already been asked. Also, many of you submitted multiple questions. I may have one question that you submitted to give as many people responsible an opportunity to be heard. We will get to as many questions as we can in 1 hour. If you are not a resident of Memphis, your question will not be asked. Following the Q&A, the City of Memphis will post the full slate of questions to its website at www.memphis10.gov and City of Memphis social media. This event is being recorded and will be housed on the Memphis City Council's YouTube channel. So, Chief Davis, are you ready?
I am. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let's begin. The first question is coming from our first category, and that is community policing and reform. And the first question is, it's coming from Sandra Summers in 38111. And her question is, in what ways will you engage with minors in our community to build relationships to develop sustainable change for the young people in our city?
Thank you, Vicki. I'm very passionate about young people and the plight of our young people right now. And I really believe that police departments should and can do more. Of course, we're always limited with resources, but I believe that we shouldn't just accept the current plight of our young folks and the challenges that they face with violence and the fear and anxiety that's amongst not just young people in Memphis, but around the country, especially in Black and Brown communities, which are disproportionately affected by gun violence and some of the other negative influences. So I believe that we should have our young people involved, and that we as a police department should partner with other civic organizations, grassroots organizations, because even though the police department has various programs like the Police Athletic League and other types of summer camps and programs, we need to mobilize other civic organizations, throughout the city and partner to bring in as many young people as we can into various types of anti-gun violence, anti-gang types of education and awareness. So I firmly believe that we must invest in prevention. We must invest in intervention and get our young people involved in the discussion about what they want to see in their community. Sometimes, we roll out programs and we don't get input from those young folks that are mostly impacted. So I believe that meaningful youth engagement means getting our young folks involved and identifying other individuals that are willing to partner with us so that we can use that opportunity as a force multiplier and reach more kids.
Okay, great. Our second question comes from Cynthia Haley, 38115. What are your thoughts on equitable neighborhood policing? Do you think it is beneficial for the community as well as the officer?
Absolutely. And for those that might not be familiar with the terminology, it basically just means that we ensure that the resources of the police department are fairly and evenly distributed throughout the city. That there's no such thing as the good side of the track or the bad side of the track, and that we deploy our resources based on data, whether, neighborhood watch programs, PAL, traffic enforcement and other crime suppression and prevention resources. When crime reduction strategies are rolled out and developed, emphasis should be placed on the areas where the data shows that the need is the most, as opposed to some communities going without the type of resources and prevention programs that they would expect or need. Taxpayers are all over the city, and police resources should be spread evenly and equitably, if you will, to all communities. So I absolutely support it. And I believe it's not just good for the community, it's good for the police department too, so that there is a culture of ensuring that we have high levels of service to every community.
Okay, and our last question from our community policing and reform category is from Josh Adams, 38116. Have you studied the 1978 consent decree? What is your plan to hold officers accountable to this law?
Well, I am familiar with the law, and even though it's dated to some degree, recently the consent decree was modified, and the department has had training as it relates to the modifications to it, and I plan to ensure that they continue to honor the 1978 consent decree. I believe in the First Amendment rights of individuals to be able to communicate and protest as they wish. And I will ensure that the work that the previous director has done continues as it relates to complying with that policy.
Okay, great. Our next category is best practices. And this question comes from Nick Massaro, 38120. Please describe how MPD's Real-Time Crime Center will leverage technology. Example, CCTV, drones, and cyber watch in coordination with Neighborhood Watch and associations in Memphis. Specifically, policing that is engaged with the cooperation of neighborhood leaders to help identify and fight pockets of crime in their geographic police ward.
So there was a lot there, but I think
Yes,
I've got the grasp of it, that the Memphis Police Department's Real-Time Crime Center, I believe, operates very similar to crime centers that I've been exposed to. I helped stand up the Video Integration Center in the city of Atlanta. That was one of my projects. And that crime center not only employs predictive policing models, it also has a footprint of over 13,000 cameras throughout the city. And the MPD's Real-Time Crime Center is a valuable tool it comprises a similar network of public-facing cameras. And when we talk about cameras, we're talking about public-facing cameras. We're not talking about cameras in private space or anything like that. But I believe that community members and neighborhoods could also partner with helping the police department with various camera systems that they have erected in public space, so that we can have real-time information about various types of crimes that are being committed in the community. And even after the crime has been committed, we can also use that footage to help bolster the investigation of vehicles that might have been in the area, or various types of tags that might have been read by a camera. And I also believe in utilizing technology like Nextdoor. Nextdoor, a lot of people aren't familiar with Nextdoor, but every neighborhood should be a part of the Nextdoor system, so neighbors can communicate with each other, and information that's received through those different platforms can be shared with the police department through the Nextdoor system. And even utilizing neighbors' Ring cameras. We've been able to really, crack down on, say, for instance, porch pirates, from people stealing packages from a neighbor's Ring camera. That has helped us with various types of investigations. So I believe that technology plays a significant role in expanding the network by incorporating other exterior-facing systems, especially in hotspot areas, whether private or public sector, can only enhance our officers' efforts in crime fight.
Okay, great. Our second question for best practices is from Catherine Hutchison, 38112. Over the last few years, Memphis has had a number of peaceful and spontaneous protests. What would your instructions be to the officers when dealing with peaceful protests?
Thank you. That's a very relevant question right now. And even in my current jurisdiction, we have had a unique approach to the recent protests. And my experience really, and my philosophy, has been to allow our citizens to have space to exercise their First Amendment rights, to peacefully protest. There have been times when, we gave community members the street. We gave them, other spaces that, typically commuters have, even on our freeways. We reroute the traffic. We try to avoid engagement or, intrusiveness by, allowing people to have their space and not intimidating individuals that wish to peacefully protest. Our country has gone through a very agonizing period, and we continue to go through that period. So while we remain committed to ensuring, peaceful demonstrations, we also remain committed to ensure the safety of all of our citizens, those protesting and those that have nothing to do with the protest. We want to make sure that everybody is safe, that property is preserved, that people aren't injured. And I think, one priority has been in planning is to make sure that we work with organizers as well. Find out, how many people plan to attend, what is the route, and having those conversations ahead of time so everybody's on the same page and can actually enjoy a peaceful protest.
Okay, well, thank you. Our next question is from Noah Quinton, 38103. What will the MPD's relationship and communication with ICE be like under your leadership? And he wants you to talk about your strategy for ensuring immigrants, regardless of their status, are safe and protected in Memphis, and also talk about your view on no-knock warrants.
So, in the last few years, and I'm going to say our because I think it was probably prevalent throughout the country, Hispanic communities experienced a lot of fear over the last administration. I'm just going to say that. And it was important in my jurisdiction because we have a growing Hispanic community, not just from this past administration, but upon my arrival, to identify a Hispanic liaison for the police department. And our Hispanic liaison in the Atlanta Police Department and also in my department in Durham, their role is a full-time job to communicate, educate, build a relationship with the Hispanic community, ensure that they understand the policies and procedures of the department so that they know that our directives are that we don't ask about immigration status, and we send out various types of communication. And I'm sure this is something that is effective even in Memphis, that we let our communities know, especially our Hispanic and Latinx communities, know that we're not in the immigration business. We are not in the immigration business. It's not a priority of the police department to be in the immigration business. And strong policies and procedures and directives in place will help guide those interactions with our community. Our Hispanic community members deserve the same type of protection and service that other communities deserve. So I believe that having a Hispanic liaison, appropriate translation, to communicate, and having those educate and inform kind of sessions, and even U visas. The U visa process is one that can be a little bit ambiguous. That's the I-918 program that provides for U visa applications, to have the police department involved in that process to help, victims of crime apply for U visa status. And the answer to no-knock warrants, there's a lot of conversation right now about no-knock warrants in my state, my current state. There are laws that prohibit no-knock warrants, and I support those laws. Too many fatalities and catastrophic incidents have occurred because of them. And I absolutely support ensuring that, even though we have work to do as a law enforcement entity, that innocent bystanders and other individuals who might be in the vicinity should not fall victim of what could, occur from a no-knock warrant.
Okay, thank you. Our next category is gun violence and permitless carry laws. David Soul 38107 says, Memphis has a problem with random gunfire almost every night throughout the city. Would you be in favor of expanding shot spotter technology citywide in order to help police curb this reckless behavior?
Well, my experience with communities that are exposed to gun violence is one that, it's heavy on my heart sometimes, because too many of our community members have normalized gun violence as a part of their everyday life. They have young people who exercise various types of routines when they hear gunfire. They jump in the tub or they fall on the floor, and no one should live under those types of conditions. And many times that activity goes unreported. So ShotSpotter is technology that I have been familiar with for many years. Unfortunately, it wasn't rolled out in the city of Durham, but I'm glad to see that it is a program that the city of Memphis has incorporated and implemented. And typically it's a 3-mile square radius, and I'm sure there are probably other areas that this technology could be expanded to. But there are a lot of misunderstandings, I believe, about ShotSpotter. I think there's opportunities to educate the community a little bit more about the technology, that it doesn't create over-policing. What it does do, it creates an environment where officers can check on people who on a normal day would not see anybody respond to something as dangerous as gunfire in their community, to at least come and collect evidence, because that evidence and that ballistic evidence could potentially help solve a crime in another location as well. So I do support ShotSpotter and look forward to having further conversations about it.
Okay, great. Our next question comes from Michael McGlasson, 38112. And like many cities in the United States, many faces an epidemic of interstate shootings. We were unable to combat this disease in 2019 with Operation Grizzly Bear, which flooded our interstates with MPD, state troopers, and sheriff deputies. However, once the operation ceased and the law enforcement presence was no longer felt, the shootings resumed. We have had 39 interstate shootings as of Friday, April 23rd. I realize the root cause of this is a larger societal issue, but how do you plan to combat this plague in our city?
So, interstate gunfire, interstate shootings is sort of a phenomenon that's unique to certain geographical areas. Some cities experience it and some don't. It doesn't mean that, cities don't have drive-by shootings and whatnot, but to have to deal with vehicles and individuals shooting at each other on the interstate, it's unique. And as I said, it's certainly a geographical kind of issue. And oftentimes those people that are involved in gang activity. And a lot of it is retaliatory offenses against one another. But it places other commuters at risk. And I know that MPD has worked really hard to suppress this activity and has dedicated resources to address these incidents, over the past few years. But this is one of those situations that requires sustainable types of maintenance plans so that people don't feel like just because the police aren't around that they can continue this type of activity. I believe that it needs to be collaborative. I would assume that most of the interstates are state roads. And this is a problem that obviously requires the kind of maintenance plan that the Memphis Police Department can't handle on their own because, you have limited resources. So I think you could also augment any type of enforcement or visibility with technology, more cameras to identify suspects that are involved and to deter. Sometimes when cameras are up in strategic locations, especially where some of these incidents occurring, it'll actually deter some of that activity. But many of the highways, as I said, in Memphis are state roads. And I would work very closely, with the state patrol, the highway patrol, and see what type of relationship we can establish, not just for operations, but for sustainable types of interventions that cut down, suppress, curtail this type of activity. And also work with the DA's office. Sometimes when you work with the DA's office, you can have a different type of prosecution or a different type of focus or attention on some of these more egregious types of incidents. So I would also work with the DA's office and potentially establish more of a task force of, how do we address this and make sure that those individuals that are perpetrating these crimes don't think it's a free-for-all and they can continue over and over again. I know I read last year there were like 83 of these type shootings on the freeway. So I would say we would need to, have enhanced and permanent enforcement and focus on prosecutions and use technology like cameras and other technology in key areas. And that would be a start.
Okay. Our third question is from Asher Crouch, 38120. Youth who are the victims of gun violence are also at risk of perpetrating gun violence. What strategies do you support that would reduce this risk among youth? Well,
I know we all have heard the saying, hurt people hurt people. And our young people are products of their environment. You know, investing in public safety is critical to law and order, but I also believe that a more potent approach is to invest in our communities with programs that provide, you know, alternatives for our youth, alternatives that redirect, you know, young people from gang and gun violence to other types of opportunities. And unfortunately, social ills sort of dictate the future of some of our young people. And until, you know, we start looking at the other cogs in the wheel and ensure that, you know, social programs, recreational programs, educational programs, dealing with poverty issues, you know, in communities don't impact that community so much that the only thing that's left is a life of crime. We have to meet our young people where they are and ensure that our programs as a police department are also available to the young people that are the least of these. In my jurisdiction here, I purchased vans because most of the young people couldn't get to my police athletic league programs. A lot of young people can't get to parks and recreation. So we have to be intentional in making sure that our young people have access to the opportunities that are out there for them. So I plan to, as I mentioned before, I think it's important that we work with programs that are already, sometimes we operate in silos, but we should collaborate, coordinate our efforts, and work in a way that we have the greatest impact on our young people through prevention, like police athletic leagues, parks and recreation, partnering with grassroots organizations, even our churches, schools, you know, civic organizations. There's so many people that are out there actually doing the work, but I believe collaboration and working together, you know, will help to curtail some of the problems that we have with our youth. And the goal for, you know, for youth violence prevention should always be to stop youth violence from happening in the first place. And as the chief of police, you know, for me, it'd be critically important to not just provide, you know, a law enforcement response when something terrible has happened, but to lead the conversations with the other stakeholders to keep our youth out of the hands of law enforcement in the first place.
Okay, great. Our next category, Chief Davis, is crime reduction. And the first question comes from Tamika Greet, 38106. Outside of police intervention, what do you feel are the top interventions necessary to reduce crime?
So one intervention that is working, you know, in my jurisdiction and I think it would potentially work anywhere is our misdemeanor diversion program through our court system, which takes police out of the criminal aspect of writing charges for misdemeanor offenses, especially for individuals that have committed a crime for the first time. And our misdemeanor diversion program started out with ages up to 17 and 18. And then we expanded it to 24 and 25, mainly because we realized that young people's minds don't develop and they make bad choices, even when they're in college. And a charge on a person's record can make the difference of them continuing in a positive trajectory in their lives or having a tarnished record where they can't get a job or they have problems in school now. And once they get that one blemish, then, you know, they have the mindset, well, I'm already messed up, so I may as well go ahead, join the gang or commit another offense. So I think misdemeanor diversion is a good way to keep our young people from being victims of the system, so to speak. During the last 4 years that I've been involved in the misdemeanor diversion program, my officers have diverted over 360 young people and some adults because they have the discretion. We gave them the discretion. If you see a person that's 60 years old and they shoplifted and they've never committed a crime before, you can send them through misdemeanor diversion. That keeps people out of jail. That was 360 people that didn't go to jail. And we had a 99% completion rate of our program. And most of those individuals never reoffended again. So that's an intervention. And of course, from a holistic approach, investing in our youth, I talked about that a little bit as well, educating and equipping our young people with, social competencies that they need, vocational training that they need, mentoring and coaching. I think we've left our young people in places to fend for themselves. And when we do that, and unfortunately, the police department can't do it all, but in partnerships, I believe that we can do better in rehabilitation programs that help individuals, even people who are returning from incarceration, so that they don't reoffend, give them the kind of support that they need.
Okay, great. Our second question is from Catherine McRitchie. She's in zip code 38104. She wants to know, what is your philosophy regarding the role of police in crime prevention in addition to crime response?
Well, to tell you the truth, crime prevention really is more important than response, because if we could prevent crimes, we wouldn't have to respond to so many. But unfortunately, there isn't enough emphasis placed on prevention, and there isn't enough collaboration in what prevention looks like, not just from the police department, but even in communities, how communities come together and shore up their community, look out for each other. So a robust crime prevention plan reduces the need for police response altogether. And all too often, we put emphasis on calls for service and making sure that we have enough officers to respond to calls, but empowering community members in the work of crime prevention as partners for safe neighborhoods is critical. So neighborhood watches, as I mentioned, even sometimes working with code enforcement, community policing through environmental design. That is a key core, crime prevention sort of program known as CEPTED. And you do these analysis so that you can help community members have lighting where there needs to be lighting, make sure that their brushes and bushes and things are cut back, and don't create environments that are rich for criminal activity in the first place. So I believe that crime prevention is critically important, and be looking forward to working with community members and neighborhood watches in order to shore up, that type of activity and programs in the city of Memphis.
Okay, great. Our third question for crime reduction is from Peggy Craig, 38103, and she wants to know, how would you tackle Memphis' rising homicide rate?
So, when we talk about homicides, I always throw in the caveat that, you have to put even more emphasis on aggravated assaults, because an aggravated assault is basically the result of a person who got lucky. And those individuals who are committing aggravated assaults are your shooters and your homicides. So my emphasis would be to place laser focused attention on the 20% of the people who are committing 80% of the crime. And that is the case in most cities, that there's a small group of people who are involved in various types of egregious violent crime, and to be laser focused on those individuals as opposed to casting a wide net on communities. And this means really identifying who those individuals are, working closely with our DA's office, their team, and our federal prosecutors to sort of dismantle some of the gang activity, the gang enterprises that exist, and hold the most egregious offenders accountable. Because, if we don't tighten up the gaps, then those same individuals will be out and committing crimes over and over again. And also, it goes back to partnering with our communities. Our community members are the best source of intelligence information that we could ever get, because when we respond, it's after the fact. But in order to get intelligence information, you have to build a strong relationship with the community. So we'll be working on building that relationship building that trust so that when something happens, community members feel comfortable, communicating with the police department about what they saw and who might be a part or involved in various types of activity. Memphis is no different than other major cities. I know there's organized crime, and with organized crime comes homicides. So collaborating with key stakeholders to include our community members. And as I said, that's the best intelligence that you can get from neighborhoods. But that does mean building strong relationships. So I'd be very excited about coming up with plans on how we can tackle, the most egregious violent crimes to include homicides.
Okay, great. Our next category is officer accountability and transparency. And the first question comes from Laura Chatfield, 38112. Her question is, the Department of Justice is beginning investigations into police pattern and practices across the country. Would you welcome and invite such an investigation into the Memphis Police Department? Why or why not?
So just a little bit of background on pattern and practice investigations. They've been around for a long time. We haven't seen as many in the last administration, but the Department of Justice will actually launch such an investigation after there's been, some indication that a police department has demonstrated, sort of systemic problems, systemic failures in a manner in which they operate. And these investigations typically emanate as a result of some serious incident. So about the various incidents that have spawned this recent pattern and practice into Louisville and some of other cities that have been under consent decrees and pattern and practice investigations over the years. It was on the heels of something happening. It's my priority that as an accredited organization, when you're an accredited organization, that means that someone has come in to make sure that you are following best practices, that you have policies and procedures in place that help keep your department out of the hands of DOJ and pattern and practice type investigations. So if such an investigation were warranted on the heels of an incident, it's my duty as a chief, to give way to any federal entity that would want to conduct such a probe. But it would be my intent and, my ambition to ensure that the department is operating in a way that the federal government, wouldn't want to come in and conduct such an investigation.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Marissa Wheeler, 38104. She wants to know, how will you handle officer misconduct and discipline, especially with regard to racial profiling and excessive force?
So, much of what has been discussed over the last, several months as it relates to police reform really crosses over into, the whole discussion on racial equity, fair and impartial policing, procedural justice, and all of the various tenets that are really important in different documents that we all are familiar with or should be familiar with. One of them being President Obama's, task force on 21st century policing. Those recommendations were excellent recommendations on officer accountability and fair and impartial policing, and ensuring that the police departments around the country operate in a constitutional manner. Much of that means that we need to regularly analyze data related to police officer encounters, which could point to racial profiling and other abuses such as use of force, unethical behavior, and other types of infractions. One of my mottos, and my folks know what it means, you have to inspect what you expect. And if you aren't constantly evaluating what is happening in your department, then these types of failures could happen. And the other side to that is to be transparent and share that information with the public. So I know the Memphis Police Department currently posts internal affairs reports and other information pertinent to officer disciplinary actions. In addition, in my organization, I post information on traffic stop data and other data sets that can be assessed to address certain types of trends that might be concerning, for the department and the community. In addition, the Memphis Police Department, they already have an officer alert program, and that program is the Performance Enhancement Program, PEP or PEP, and that alerts supervisors, and it will trigger when there is a need for intervention or even additional training for officers. So there are all kinds of other policies and procedures, especially early warning triggers that supervisors can be trained on that will initiate evaluation of officers before they build up a record of behavior that's not congruent with the department philosophy or contradictory to department rules and regulations.
Okay. I think this last question under this category, you might have already answered it with what you just said, but it's from Megan Keel, 38112. She says, how will you track whether or not there is disparate minority contact and treatment from MPD? Will you commit to making these data points transparent to the public for accountability?
Absolutely, we'll make them transparent. And I think it's important. As I mentioned before, I did sort of hit on the fact that various types of reporting is important, especially as it relates to traffic stop data. But what's even more important is to the consideration to analyzing the data is to ensure the correct interpretation is provided. Sometimes we put out numbers, the quantitative, and we don't put out the qualitative information. So the interpretation of the data is just as important as the numbers. For example, demographics, what officer is making the stop? Is he the same officer? Is it disparate treatment? Is it racially motivated? Is it racially motivated if the officer is Hispanic and the person he stopped is Hispanic? So it's really important to really take a deep dive into the data, but it's important to be transparent and share that information on dashboards. And, in my current work, we have a quarterly report that we put out on traffic stop data, not just on traffic stop data, but also on disciplinary actions, use of force data as well, and the different categories of use of force by officers.
Okay. Our last category is personal history. And the first question is from Nathan Wheeler, 38104. In your career, what are ways you have utilized community groups, and how will you utilize community groups here in Memphis to create safer neighborhoods?
Well, I am known for rallying the troops in the community. So we can't do our work without the community and our community groups. That's where all the hard work is, in the trenches, in the vineyard, and, police departments that are working in a silo and not working with community members. We all have the same objective to provide safe communities that can enjoy, a good quality of life. So I absolutely have been involved in that type of activity. I welcome our department's resources to be utilized by other, civic groups in leveraging greater impact. For example, I've partnered, in education and awareness and other community events with churches, universities, neighborhood associations, the Divine Nine. The Divine Nine do a lot of work in the community. Mm-hmm. And and what better way to build relationships than to partner with people who are already boots on the ground. I'm a member of the Links Incorporated. They do a lot of work in community, and I partner, utilize my resources to help support various type of Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Salvation Army, Toys for Tots, Meals on Wheels. There's a multitude of work that can be done, not just in the response category or responding to crime, but being members and stakeholders in the community that we serve. Because overall, after all, our work should be a 360-degree approach. How can we help to improve the communities that we serve? So I believe in mobilizing community groups. I think it's necessary to build strong and sustainable relationships. And like I said, not just responding, to crime, but demonstrating concern and empathy for the communities from a holistic standpoint.
Okay. Well, our second question is, the Hispanic immigrant community are vulnerable targets of violent crimes in Memphis. What is your experience dealing with the Hispanic Latino community, and what is your plan of action here in Memphis to reduce the rate of violent crimes, particularly toward the Hispanic community? And I'm sorry, this is from Inez Negrete.
Okay. And I touched on it just a little bit earlier when I was talking about ICE and, the police department's role in the community. I think there has been a lot of role conflict between, municipal police departments and, federal entities. And we have spent a lot of time, and I think well-deserved time, in our Hispanic and Latinx communities to help them understand that we are a public safety entity that serves all communities. And, I think it's important, as I mentioned before, to have a full-time liaison to support the needs of non-English speaking community members with effective translation in writing, and orally, to community members, because everything that we have in writing, every brochure, every piece of information that we have written in English, it should be provided in Spanish as well. Supporting educational forums, as it relates to U visas, and just getting an opportunity for officers to spend more intimate time in those circles and in those forums, getting to know and helping to tear down, the myths about, municipal law enforcement, and that we're not a threat, because whatever's happening in the Hispanic community, whatever crimes are being committed in the Hispanic community are bleeding over into other communities. So that valuable information from our non-English speaking community members is important for us to get in order for us to help solve crimes in other areas. So I would like to work, in that same manner that I do now here in Memphis, to build trust in Hispanic Latinx communities, and also hire more bilingual officers so that there's more fluid communication for victims of crime.
Okay. And our last question is from Kenneth Douglas, 38108. And she wants to know, how can citizens best support you and the Memphis Police Department as a whole as you assume this new role?
Oh, that's a different kind of question. I would say that community members should commit to finding ways to get involved, in your community. Even though you might be involved in your community in other ways, get involved in your community from a public safety standpoint as well. And, through web-based platforms, like I mentioned before, like Nextdoor, join your neighborhood watch. And if you don't have a neighborhood watch, I'm sure the MPD can help set one up, and work with us to erect neighborhood watch signs so that people know that this is a community that has come together, that they're working together to combat crime. So I would say be a part of the Citizens Police Academy. You know, when you go through the Citizens Police Academy, you learn so much about the inner workings of the police department. But not only that, the police department learns a lot about the community that they're serving. So this past Citizens Police Academy class that we rolled out in the city of Durham, we had a racial equity class. We wanted to let all of our community members know the work that we're doing as a department to ensure that the issues that we see that face us around the country right now are being well thought out and addressed even internally in our police department as individuals in higher positions. It's our responsibility to make sure that our community members get fair and equitable treatment. So I say to that person who I look forward to meeting you and partnering with you and your community as we work together to make Memphis a better place to live.
Well, I thought that would be a good question to end with, Chief Davis. But before we go, I want to give you an opportunity, just a few minutes to say or share anything you want with the Memphians here.
Well, thank you, Vicki. Yeah, first, I do want to thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to address the residents of Memphis, and thank you to the residents of Memphis who took the time out to first submit these very thoughtful questions and join us today for this important public session. I realize that the role of your next top cop is one that probably engenders great hope and anticipation from all Memphians. But please know that my interest in this agency was also supported by, the desire to be a part of a promising and hardworking police department, the obvious progress and development in a city like Memphis, and of course, the rich history, the rich civil rights history that Memphis is known for. My choice was well thought out, and I honestly believe that this endeavor is one that, will build even stronger community relationships and partnerships and improve the capacity of the men and women of the Memphis Police Department. I think that, I've spent, almost 3 decades working in communities that just wish to simply enjoy peace and tranquility, free from violence, and improved quality of life, the kind of life that every community member deserves. So, my commitment to service wherever, I have been, wherever it's led me, I serve not just in my professional capacity, but also in my personal capacity as well. So today, as I prepare for the next steps in this process, I ask that you continue to stay engaged as community members as you did today, and that, the future will include you and I working together and the men and women of the Memphis Police Department to make, this wonderful city, a great place to live. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief Davis. I sincerely appreciate you doing this today, and I wish you the best. And I look forward to working with you with the NAACP as well. And I just want to say that concludes our Q&A session with Chief Davis. And I want to thank all of you, everybody that submitted questions, and the ones that I didn't get to, please check the website so you will see all of the questions that were asked. And that's all for now. I just want to say have a wonderful day and a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.